they get triggered, and we have to let them know, or at least be aware that what we are seeing and hearing and experiencing is someone who's triggered. And sometimes we know we're triggered and sometimes we don't. So I want to back up a little bit and go back to the heated thing, right? That actually comes from the physiological reactions that happen when you get triggered, that you can actually feel the heat. I know that I have experienced that, where I feel the heat rise. It's usually in my neck. It rises, right? Some people say they can feel it rising all the way up past their ears, their eyes. There's cartoons when I was growing up with the characters with the steam coming out, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's because our physical body reacts to being triggered. And what do we mean by triggered? It means somebody says or does something. Sometimes you could be triggered by smell or sound, and it recreates and taps into a memory within you. And we all think that memories up here, but hey, it's all throughout your body. Your heart carries memories. So something happens
Yeah.
and it touches that memory, and then you can be in this place of feeling that heat rise, or sometimes your stomach starts to churn, or some people say their palms get sweaty, or I pace, right? I have a couple of things that happen to me. The heat is one, but I also start pacing. The physical body is like needing to move, almost trying to just get away from the trigger, but you can't because it's in you. But that's what being triggered is. It takes you back to a place, and sometimes you can remember that place, and sometimes it's just the body remembers, and therefore you start to get those physical symptoms. And then there's a very small window between you using some kind of technique to get yourself out of that trigger, to bring yourself down, and the next step is you start to rise, right? The trigger escalates whatever's happening in you physically. Some people say they see red. I mean, that's really when you've allowed it to go to the highest heights, because when you see red, a lot of times what you do from there, you don't even remember, or you don't even know you're doing it. But most of us don't go to the place of seeing red, but we do go to the place of allowing our reaction, our emotions, our triggers to speak and act for us. And then it's anybody's guess as to what is going to happen from there. And we all get triggered. Another reason why I wanted to talk about, there's no one who doesn't get triggered. I don't care if you're the calmest person in the world, because the body remembers and then reacts. There are things that are going to trigger you.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate that. I think the main thing from what I'm taking from you as I share my thoughts is the immediate connection to anger. I think that's interesting simply because there's over 300 emotions out there, right? And I think that we're good at about identifying in ourselves and others about 10, 15, right? Something like that. And even that might be a stretch, as a lot of these things are really fit under the same umbrella of other emotions, right? And so I think for me, when it came to triggers, what I noticed is I'm someone who has anxiety. So for me, I had to really just tap into, what's coming up in me. How can I decipher what emotion really is coming out in this moment through these physical indicators, right? So I know for me, when I'm triggered, like in an anxious way, like when my anxiety is triggered, I fidget a lot, my leg will shake, something like that, right? But that anger, that heat, that'll definitely rise, if it is an angry situation for me. I definitely find myself getting headaches and things of that nature, right? So when it comes to like really just the chemical responses to these things that we go through and that happen to us, I really think it is important to know what's what, when, and why, as much as possible, right? And I think that as I move into generationally speaking, right, I think that my generation a lot of times isn't given a lot of space to analyze why they're triggered, right? And analyze what that trigger is and really the openness to what's coming up for them, right? The reality is, as you said, everyone gets triggered, right? And I think that the younger you are, you simply just have less language to really,
and less authority.
Right, less language and authority, right? And I love that you said that, because one of the things that I was going to go into is, we talk about education, right? School. A lot of these schools have like a zero tolerance policy for any sort of behavior outside of that environment's values, right? And while that is, I think, okay in the sense of to have rules and regulations to ensure safety and all of those things, right? I feel like it's very difficult to for a young person to even feel open, or like that community is open to a differing experience than whatever is said on paper or whatever is said and enforced by the teachers or administration. And I want to be very clear, as someone who I hated school, to be completely frank, but even then, like, I love that you said the authority, because adults are triggering. Not every adult in these communities are there to teach, inform, and hope that the next generation does better in certain areas.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
And I agree with that, but I also think that even the ones that are, since everybody gets triggered, they get triggered too. Certain behaviors or whatever trigger them, and they don't understand that they're triggered. So they don't have the language, but they do have the authority. And then you end up paying for them being triggered and not taking care of being triggered.
Right. And my whole thing that messed me up was I was going to call you on that, right? Like, you're triggered by something, or I'm triggered by something, and this is what's happening. And the more that you're not open to simply, like, I have to listen to you, like, as a teacher or as an administration, staff, right? Whoever you are in those places, right? At those times too, right? We got to listen. We got to respect the authority first before we even get to humanity, to be completely real, and these types of conversations, without expulsions, without suspensions, without other disciplinary things, right? And so I think when it comes to just that openness to having the conversation, saying, I'm triggered, this is what's coming up, and not dismissing that, in fact, leaning into the authority to use it in a way of, how can I help get you some language around that, right? How can I, a lot of young people don't even know there's 300 emotions out there, like, really, that, like, of what they're experiencing, they just know they're experiencing it. And so I think if you as an adult, again, I would love to hear your perspective, right? But I think if you're an adult and you're in, like, an educator role like that, right, and you're not one of those people who would lean in and see some of these things as simply like there's more to it. I don't know if education's for you, or at least the types of places where they say, really enforce zero tolerance and all of that stuff. I think, kids are kids. They're figuring it out as much as they're figuring it out. And the reality is, a lot of these young people are given very mature and adult hands that they were dealt by life, that honestly some of these teachers haven't even gone through, right? So again, when we talk about the openness to something else, right, to something more, and having that discussion, I think that we need more of that, so that our generation is not acting out in anger, thinking that when they're triggered, anger is the only thing that's coming up.
Right.
And so if they're angry, then they have to act on it, right? We need less of that, for sure.
Yeah, and that's really important too for parents. Anybody who in particular is working with kids, with young people, to have the language, knowing that you're not simply angry, right? Or what you did made me angry. No, it could be that you're angry, but it also more than likely is that you're triggered. And that's something in your past, right? And it doesn't have to be way back, but a lot of times it is. But something that you experienced is now reacting to what's just happened, and you are starting to feel the physical effects. And rather than stop and say, hey, wait a minute, I'm triggered here, right? You're now taking it out on this child. Or even if you're not triggered, if you aren't familiar with this, then you can't say to the child or to yourself, oh, okay, wait a minute, I'm looking at this and I'm saying he's triggered. Okay, so then let me just see if I can wait this out, or let me, if you know the child, or maybe you know the things that you can say to de-escalate them. I mean, that's the thing that for me that's missing in so many things. Just even growing up, there was never ever any language about this, right? If my parents were upset, if my mom was upset, she was mad, she was angry. There's a there's a song from way back. It's called there's a line in it that says, Leroy, we seen your mama, she mad, man, she mad. You know, and it's just like, hey, your mother's mad. That's all. And ain't nobody said, something you did triggered her. And that was never, ever a conversation. And yet I can remember as a child thinking, this reaction is like really way above what just happened here. I can remember distinctly. So again, I didn't have the language then. I wasn't in conflict resolution then, but I do remember that thought on many occasions, not just my mom, but other people's parents too. I could see like, what else is going on here? Because the punishment is in no way, not even close to the crime. So what are they reacting to, really, honestly? And it's funny too, that just made me brought up a memory. My dad never ever hit us, right? Never spanked us, never hit us. And one day, he worked so many jobs, and he would sleep afternoon, like he had to go to the post office and work the midnight shift. And so one day he was sleeping, and my mom was at work, and my sister and I got an invitation to go to the house next door to play. And so we went in. My dad was asleep, but I tapped him, to try to wake him up. And it seemed to me that he did wake up. And I said, hey, Dad, can we go? And he knew who the kids were. He knew the parents too. And he said, yes. So we went. I don't know, maybe a couple of hours or an hour at the most. He comes bursting through their door, swinging a belt. My dad, like I said, he never hit us, and he's swinging, and he beat us. It's not funny. He beat us in the house, out the house, up to our house. And and it just so happened that by the time we got back to the house, my mom was coming home from work, and she was just like as stunned as we were, like, what is happening here? And she said, what's going on? Because you never, first of all, even lose it, but you never beat them. And my dad, he again didn't have the language to say I was triggered, but what he said was that he had experienced that he was the oldest of 6 children and the only boy, and and so what he experienced is his mom having to work late in the hospital, and that his sisters would go in while she was sleeping, and they didn't do what we did. They would just whisper, "Hey, I'm going to so and so's house," and leave. So that's a great example of being triggered. Like, that's a memory that you had, not just up here, but in your body, like what that felt like and how you didn't like that your sisters did it. And now your daughters have done it to you according to your trigger, right? And so that's why he went into that place. Again, I still don't think the punishment fit the crime in that one. But given that my dad, like I said, never raised a hand to us and often never yelled at us either, he was just very mild mannered, we were able to get past it. But it is a perfect example of somebody being triggered and then reacting rather than being able to bring themselves down. Because clearly, to get from our house to theirs, and like and through, and you're hitting out with the like, you are in that place. You are barely there with us. You're back in that place that has gotten you triggered.
Yeah. And I think we just need more discussions around that on both sides, right? Like, I think that even for young people, when an adult can come and say, like, this is what was coming up for me, right, as a person, right, we can only connect to the human level of that, right? Because we will only find places in which that we've had the same thing happen to us, right? And it's not something we want to bond over, but it's something that we can have shared context over. And I think that, again, you're absolutely right. Even context doesn't excuse certain actions, right? But the conversation, right, as opposed to simply jumping to the consequence, which is what has really become culture for us and really become culture for this world, right? It's kind of like think later or like talk later, right?
If at all.
If at all, right? And so we kind of need to reverse that. Right. And I think if we reverse that, we can honestly reverse a lot of the way in which that we coexist every single day. That's not pretty, right? There are a lot of pretty things, but of the stuff that's not pretty, I think we can coexist better.
But even young person to young person, right? Because a lot of the work that I did was in schools and with young people, and so I saw a lot of fights. They didn't film them back then, but I see young people now, filming fights or watching fights, and there's never the language or the conversation with your friend later. Like, wow, you were triggered. Like, what happened? Where did you go? Or what was the memory, or what? It's more like, again, I got heated, and there's no examination or explanation that needs to even be given. But people are like, oh, I get it, like, me too, I would have been. But we really do need to stop and examine, folks, like, really what happened to me here. Because in this work, in conflict resolution work, we know that you are probably never really in the conflict that you're currently in. And I'm going to say that again. You are never really in the conflict that you're currently in. It goes back to some other point in time, and you are rarely dealing with this person in front of you that you're having a conflict with purely. It's something else, somebody else, some residue, something that has not been resolved or wasn't resolved to your liking, and this is reminding you of it. And therefore, it's very easy to get triggered in the current conflict by something that happened in another conflict. And if you're not if you're not aware of that, then you can't really sit yourself down and say what really happened. And I know as a parent, I did a lot of that, because I recognized that I was triggered by things that my mom was triggered by, but they weren't necessarily things that me personally as a person, would get upset about. I just got upset and triggered because these were the things that would trigger her. So I would have to sit back and go, wow, like a big one for me was, well, that your kids are talking back. Don't talk back. Oh my gosh, man, they didn't have the kind of sayings on t-shirts back then. But that should have just been a t-shirt for every day. Don't talk back to me. And I had to examine the first time I was triggered by, oh, it was probably your brother because he's older, right? 6 years older. By that, I had to sit back and go, well, first of all, what does that even mean? Second of all, is that a thing for you, Lynn? Like, really, is that a thing for you? Or is this just because your mom and every other mom when you were growing up said that this was wrong? And it really isn't a thing for me. I just ask for the respect of how you say it. And even in the how you say it, knowing my sons, right, I can tell when they are triggered, and so I can give grace and space for them. Maybe they're not saying it right now, right? But what are they saying? And that also comes from mediation work. Is like when people come in the door, they're not, oh, I came to talk to you about this conflict. No, they're going for it, right?
Yeah.
They're usually yelling at each other,
Yep.
even name calling. But I got used to listening through that to hear, like, what's this conflict about? So applying that in the house, right, with you all, I could give space for you being triggered, especially once I figured out the talking back is not a thing. Like, how do I know what's going on with you all if you don't talk back? Like, I talk back. What is that?
Yeah.
I mean, that's me personally. Like, what is that even about? But anyway, I noticed that a lot of times I was triggered by things that I really had to investigate and evaluate for myself, examine for myself. Like, is that really something that should even trigger you? And how do you take that trigger off the table?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing up like the name calling and the things of that nature, because I feel like triggers are very like quick moments that happen, and then as I said, like when you don't open up the space to converse, the space to say what's coming up, like the space to listen through, which again, easier said than done, and like way easier said than done. There's a science to everything. So like, not that we even figured out the science. We just figured we want to learn this science as opposed to the other sciences.
Right.
But I think that that's when it can become episodic, whatever that conflict is happening and how it's escalating.
Yeah.
And then the more that you don't give that space, the more that these things become culture and then character.
Yeah.
And that is like, character is the last thing that anyone wants to question, have questioned about themselves, of course, right? But it becomes a real question because it's one thing to make a mistake, it's another thing to enable behavior, and then it's another thing to simply have that behavior become second nature.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm glad that you brought up honestly some benefits as we move into some benefits of triggers, right? Because one of the things that I noticed in the space in which you and Dad offered for both of us was my ability to see this in other people as a young person, especially young, who's triggered a lot myself, who's I'm swimming in the same waters as everyone here, right? Especially everyone my age. And the reality is, like, there's been a couple of times where I've been able to prevent things from escalating simply by asking, what's really going on here, or there's something deeper. It's not just this one little thing that was said. Like me being able to say, like, right, I know you, I've seen you, I've triggered you before, like, and this, there's no way this is what's getting you, right? And so when you just give that space, people, as mad as they can be, as hurt as they can be, even if they're still not wording things correctly, they become more open to looking for the language. They become more open to receiving the opposite of what they were expecting, as far as how the conflict and the way it would go, right? The healing process. They didn't even a lot of people don't even think healing is a part of or something that they're entitled to in the equation. We're all entitled to heal from something, especially something that hurt us, something that traumatized us, something that principle went against who we are and our values. We're all allowed to heal from that, right? However, if we're not given that space, people will think that that's not even an option.
Right.
And so I had to say, even with my boys, like, look, I get it. There's certain things, like certain lines, which I know we need to talk about and make clear that you cross. It's not that there can't be a conversation. It's simply that there's less room for error in that conversation. I completely understand. We're also young. I think the more older you get, the more you want to talk, the more you kind of want to, thicken that line and not make it thinner. Because, you have more stuff to lose and all that other stuff, right? But I just think the reality is, like, I've yes, lost some relationships to triggers, right, as we all have, and things of that nature. But I think I've also gained, a new understanding and a better understanding of some of the friends that I have by simply questioning or asking, what there's got to be more here. And if there is, tell me. And if you don't know, let's figure it out together. So I think that's definitely a benefit. But as we move into getting into some more benefits, right?
Yeah.
Because not everything is, I think triggers have a very negative connotation, right? I think that, it really is part of the duality of a human, right? I think it's part of who we are. And I think that there's beauty in any and everything. So we just got to look for it. And I think we found a few things. So let's start us off.
Yeah. So first of all, chemical indicators. A lot of us don't even know that our physiology really does play a part in this. And like I said, so we'll use the term "I was heated," but really not giving credence to the fact that you most likely were physically heated. You felt that heat. And it's important to get in touch with what happens to you when you get triggered. So the chemical indicators, that's a benefit to you to go, okay, what's happening? I'm noticing. I can remember when you were younger, lots younger, and I do not know what you were triggered. Definitely, you were triggered. But then you did or said something that just triggered me to new heights. I had never felt the heat that hot on my neck, and I can remember when that chemical indicator came. I can remember visioning me kicking in the door to your room. And I fortunately, having the skills that I have, was able to look at, like, what's happening? What's this about? Number one, you got to bring yourself down. And I use all kinds of techniques, breathing being one of them. But number two, you got to examine what's happened. What triggered you?
How old was
I? You were probably maybe 9.
God damn, that's
you were probably like 9, 10 the most. You weren't a teen yet.
I must have did some
I don't know, but that's the thing. I'm gonna say this. I'm gonna say this too, right? The chemical indicators are very interesting because even if it's not really a big deal, because your body has learned that as a trigger, the chemical indicators still come. The fact that to have been that triggered, and I can't even begin to tell you what you said or did. I just can't. I don't. So clearly, it wasn't something that was a big deal to me, but my body reacted anyway for me. Yeah,
that's huge. I think just one thing I would add to that. I appreciate you bringing that to us. I didn't know I was on that timing at 9, but I mean, hey,
you was a trip.
I was but like not on that level, right? Not on that level. This is learning in real time, right? Hey, but I think for me too, right? Like, as I was kind of saying earlier, I really do think it's important to, really understand just how vast emotions are. And then I think that just ties into, I think there's so much intersectionality between, your triggers and your emotions. Like, it's that simple, right? They're indicators of. And so for me, right, like, just some of the physical sensations, I knew, like, when I started to get really anxious in a certain moment, like, my heart rate would start getting increased. Like I would kind of like skip a beat almost, right? And so as I got older, like I was able to, put the language to it, and that was my anxiety talking, right? And so I realized, like, if I get angry and my fists are balled, right, or something like that, then I know I'm angry, right? So again, I think just not being afraid to go there with yourself, right? To say, like, I'm not even angry or any of these other things. I'm sad. I'm disappointed, right? And what does that look like? How does that show up in you? I know for me, if I'm sad or disappointed, I'm like silent. Like I'm upbeat. Everyone knows this. I'm upbeat. I'm here. I'm there. You know what I mean? But I feel anything of sadness, disappointment, it's like, whoop, shut down almost, right? And so really understanding what these things, how these things come up for you, I think is a easier way to even put some language to it. Yeah. As hard as it is.
Yeah, and that's a benefit. And before you go to the next one, I do have to say this because you said, "Oh, I didn't even know I was like that."
I knew I was like that, but like
at 9. But I'm going to say
that's crazy.
3, I bought you a shirt, and I kept it because we all loved it. I bought you a shirt that the shirt. Yes. It said "little in size, big in attitude," and it was like this was made for you, and it was great. Everybody got it. They were like, "Yep." That's him.
I think everything from then just got bigger. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but hey, it's gonna trigger someone, and let's have a conversation. Right? Next.
When you get triggered, it reveals.
Yeah. I think that's sick.
Listen.
Yeah. Sad but sick.
We are all wounded. We are all wounded, and unfortunately, we live in a world that has not paid a lot of attention to helping to heal in that way. I'm not saying that the services don't exist. I'm just saying that it makes you look weak when you admit to having been wounded, to have some wounds that do need some healing. Yeah. And triggers tell you what those are. And sometimes we don't even know, wow, that I was wounded by that, or that wound is still there, or that's still bothering me at that level, right? I thought I dealt with it. So when you get triggered, you get information that says, hey, I need to look, right? Is there a wound here that needs to be healed? Because this is touching it. And I see people, like, I go from saying triggered to, oh wow, that touched a wound, because the level of intensity for some folks is beyond, again, what's happened in the moment. You can tell this is something that's really hurting them inside, and it needs some healing.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Let's get the next one.
There's an opportunity for growth and change, right? If you really recognize, some people just enjoy being triggered and being able to just go off, right? Because they've allowed themselves to do that. They've given themselves license to do that. And I'm not saying that people don't need to be confronted when they really do need to be confronted. But if everything is a confrontation to you, and at a level of intensity where you just allow your triggers to just take you all over the place, and then ask to be excused or forgiven for that behavior, then you are not taking the opportunity to grow and change. I believe that triggers can reveal for us, hey, this is a place where I may need some help to grow, right, and change this. Because look at where it's landing you. Look at what, and we'll talk about the negative effects later, but look at what the outcomes are when you continue to allow your triggers to just take you wherever they want to take you, without really seizing that time to look for, so how do I, with this information, how do I then take the opportunity to grow?
Yeah. I think for me, like, even if there's certain things that maybe don't need to change, but it's the way you approach a certain thing or the way you respond, right? Like, that's growth. Like, and I think I think, for instance, like the only reason I say that is like I know, like for me, I've got like a tone to me like that doesn't land with every kind of person, right? So I have to be very careful of if I know I'm going to say something in a certain way, how I say it, right? How is it going to land? The words I use, right? And things of that nature. And I only say that because I think it's something that is a good thing or something that I've allowed to be a good thing. It has taken me far, like just the way in which I think it's a New York thing. I'm not even gonna lie, like it's a New Yorker thing. We just have a little aggression in our tone, a little bite to our right, a little tang, a little something like that, right? So I think like in those respects, like that's not something about myself I want to lose. However, how can I keep that and still be able to open as many doors as possible? I think that's the real question.
You got to know when to use it, and
Right.
I have to say, I just really love that we've gotten to a place where it's like when that tone comes out, and I'm like, wait a minute, I should not be getting that tone. I can just go, huh, and you're like, oh, you just smooth it, right? But I love that you have said I'm not losing it, but I do have to recognize when, hey, this isn't the appropriate thing, or this isn't working.
Right.
Yeah, right.
So, or with this person, whatever it is, that's what that means.
Yeah.
So I mean, these are benefits. I think that I'm glad we put this into the episode because again, I think there's just such a negative connotation to triggers, and again, I really think it becomes so easy to just enable other people's behavior and not give that space and to let them run on their triggers, because if you think about it, it's like, well, it's them and their triggers and they got to deal with it. I don't have to deal with it. So as long as I can kind of step away but still have a view of what's going on, right? We live in that kind of coexisting society. And so I think it's good that we put benefits here. But the reality is, I mean, there's some possible outcomes, for responding unhealthily to your triggers. And so one thing that I said is that we said is unhealthy habits become culture, right? The reality is everyone makes mistakes. Everyone is entitled to make mistakes. And everyone is owed an opportunity to learn from it. I believe that. Whether you take that opportunity or not is on you. And I just think that, as we said, like, and as I just said with enabling, right? Like if you're not doing these things for yourself, if you're not having that, there's got to be more here conversation with yourself, right? You can kind of expect the world is not going to give you that opportunity too. And the reality is there's already so many triggered people living in their triggers, acting on their triggers, allowing unhealthy habits to become not only culture but character. That's something we can bank on, right? And so we want to do the best we can to, of course we have generations of work to do here, but to open up those spaces, right? And to say, down the line, brother, like I can see how right now in this moment, how responding that way might have felt right? But here's something to think about for down the line, right? Here's something to think about of how it could affect you, not just affect your job or your relationships. I think a lot of people do that. Oh, I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to lose my relationship. I don't think you want to lose yourself in that equation either. I think that's the worst thing that you could lose. And of course we can't save everyone, but damn it, we could try, in the sense of like, trying to, do our best to, eliminate the problem before it even comes up. And that comes in checking, that comes in confrontation. And, a lot of people, you're right, that's unbearable for some, but we can make it bearable.
Well, we live in a culture that promotes this becoming unhealthy habits.
For sure.
You can film all of the worst things that anybody can do. That's encouraging it. And then people are watching and those numbers are rising. So you looking at yourself and trying to get yourself into check isn't always encouraged. And in fact, the opposite. The opposite.
It's certainly not celebrated.
That's right.
For sure.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you saying that. For sure. Next, you just feel less inclined to being a student of life, a student of these moments, right? A student of yourself. The reason I said that is because I feel like young people are sponges. I think that we do lean into, again, as you said, authority, and I think we lean into the trust of, if you've been here longer than me, I should trust that you know what you're saying, and and you're looking out for me. I think that's something that we think about, right? We do develop, our distrust and all that stuff as well, but I feel like when we're younger, that is kind of the place that we start from and try to hang on to until we realize at some point, like, we can't take everything at face value. We can't trust every single person that they have good intentions for us, that they are for us and for what we want to do, and open to learning who we are, right? And so I think at that point you become a student, in that, you really choose, who are people that align with me, and who are people that I really can learn from, who are people whose words land in a way that really, I can't run from, and it feels good, whether it's said in a way or not that I agree with, right? All of these things. And there's so many teaching moments in those things, like in having something said to you in a way that, you maybe don't like, or you're not used to, right? All of these things are teaching moments. And when you put yourself in a student mind frame, not a sponge, in the sense of absorbing everything, taking everything at face value, I think you begin to live a safer life, in the sense of more trust in yourself, and more trust in how you'll show up in the world, even in those times where things are not as pretty.
Yeah. And you also, being the student to finding out how you don't allow others to control you. Because when you triggered and you allow your triggers to just lead you, other people are controlling you. And I have seen that happen. I've seen people who don't, like, afraid to fight. Remember, I worked with a lot of young people, but they know this person, or let their triggers just go all wild, right? And they get heated and they will do whatever. They're the person you put out in front because you're not willing to engage in your own battles. So you put that person in front. And if you really want to learn to be someone who understands you and can control you. And that is, you're right, you are less inclined to be a student when you're not familiar with even the language of being triggered.
For sure. Absolutely. And then lastly, I think we can all agree here. You just threaten or lose important relationships. I can simply say right now, even at 22, about to be 23, like, I've lost some relationships that I cared about, to triggers, and to not having that space necessarily opened up for me. But even then, knowing that I've got the skills, knowing that I've been presented with the information, right? Not allowing myself to trust that these skills work in those moments, right? Opening up and saying, if you're not going to do it, well, I'll open it up for us. We need to have a discussion, right? And so the reality is, like, you just don't want to lose certain people, certain communities, certain environments, right? The ones that feed you, those are the ones I think you want to work on. Not like just being triggered and like working on how you respond to it, right? Like, you want to be cautious of that, right? But I think that those are the places where you want to, be a student the most. Look for those teaching moments the most. The people that you can trust, and the people that want to explore with you. It's all about exploration at the end of the day, and I think that's important. Yeah. I really do think that's important. And to the relationships that I've lost, life happens. To the ones that I care less about, I think for me, it's more like I'm thinking about how I showed up in those scenarios, in those times, in those relationships, and making sure that for anything similar next time, I do these things when these things come up, to hopefully lessen the odds of me losing or threatening an important relationship to me.
Yeah, I think that people, like, there's some people that just want to be known as, well, I just the hothead, or there's the hothead. But you don't always recognize what that's costing you in a relationship with other people. Sometimes people just don't want you around because they know that you do not know how to control you, right? And control, not in a bad sense, but control in that these things about you. You know what triggers you. You could have a conversation and say, I'm sorry, but you just cannot do that with me, right? Because you know that that's going to trigger you, or you just can't talk to me that way because you know that you're going to be triggered if they do that. And if you care about relationships, and I was going to say, it also threatens you to lose opportunities too. I've seen young people who just like, you keep trying and trying to work with them on the way that they react to certain things, and you let them know, like, as you get older, there's going to be higher consequences. You see them on a job, they're going to lose that job because they do not know how to look at themselves and see not only what triggers them, but how do I bring myself down. So a great example today at the gym, shout out to Gabriel, and having a tough morning and just working out really hard. And I was recognizing, oh, he's working through something, right? Because you could see it, because I know that he's in touch with the way that this could really hurt him, right? In certain relationships or just in life in general. And he's learned the lesson from past mistakes, and he still knows that there are things that trigger him, right? But what he's learned is what are the things to say to himself? What are the things to do that will help him work through it, so that the triggers are not controlling him. He's controlling them.
Absolutely. It was beautifully said. Yeah, I think this is good. I think we need this conversation, and I think it needs to be ongoing.
Yes.
Right? I think we need, so much more space for this, because I think, this is such a perfect example of sweeping in front of your own doorstep and really, truly feeling the effects of that before going and helping others and before going and showing up in other places, right? Like, I think that, the more that we are in tune with us and ourselves, the more that, the world kind of orients to that, instead of us feeling like we have to orient ourselves to the world in every aspect. We have a lot more control and a lot more power than we know. And I think that it's another thing we're not really reminded of and reminding each other of all the time. Like, bro, you're strong, or queen, you're strong. Like, that's a strong thing you went through and came out of, right? And so, again, we have generations of these skills to implement, right? And to make profitable and to make the new marketing thing, right? The new media stuff that people want to see. But it's possible. It's possible. And it's possible to do that authentically and in harmony too, as scary as it can get. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and I would say, and thank you for, I think your wisdom on this has been so good. And
yeah, I live it. I'm living it right now. So, I mean, I think it's perfect. It's personal. It's perfect, but it's personal. So I think that's the only reason I could speak to it. And, I was triggered even talking to y'all right now about triggers, right? Like, of course.
That can definitely happen because you start to think about those things, right? That trigger you. I also want to say, as a parent, I think it's so important. Like, one of the things that I hated and still hate to this day is this saying, the terrible twos. 2-year-olds are just being 2-year-olds. Why are we calling them terrible, and their behavior is terrible? And we keep continuing that language rather than being able to look at, number one, developmentally, where they are. And listen, parents, I know they don't teach developmental, right? You have to actually look for that knowledge and get it yourself. It's not something that comes automatically with becoming a parent. But so developmentally, what is happening? But number two, what's happening is this child triggered by something, and being able to give that language even at 2, and being able to have those conversations, so that we start teaching our children from young that these things happen, that we all get triggered. So it's not you're 2 and you're terrible, but that you're 2 and you're triggered, and guess what, at 3, 4, 5 and on until you're 80, 90 years old, you will experience being triggered. And so how do we then teach, what do you do when that happens? You don't label someone as bad, right, or hothead. You help them to learn what's happening within their body and what can they do about it, so that this isn't the reaction that happens every single time for them. So I do believe that this was an important conversation, and does need to be an ongoing conversation, because what we are seeing in society is people allowing themselves to just do whatever the emotions say do, whatever the wound is saying. The wounds speak, and therefore the wounds want to be healed, but what we hear them as is they want to be avenged. And so we allow this kind of behavior to happen, when we actually have the power, when we learn the skills, right? We have the power to change it.
I appreciate that. The avenged. That's very true. That's very true. We hope y'all enjoyed this conversation. I loved and hated it, just as I had to facilitate it and feel these things as I'm facilitating, right? But again, such a perfect topic. I'm so glad that people are tuning in. We're definitely feeling the love, feeling the messages that we're getting sent. So really and truly, thank you to everyone who's giving us a watch, giving us a like, reshared our stuff. It means the world to us. Every ounce does not go unnoticed. So please watch us live and comment on e360tv.com, Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple TV. As my mom says, Dr. Mom says, watch us on your TVs. I agree. Let us know if we look good on TV. I think that's the main reason we want to know. But however you tune in, please know we so appreciate it. Check us out on YouTube, Working It Out Across Generations. Check us out on Facebook, Working It Out TV show. Again, as we say all the time, conflict is here to teach you something about ourselves. So go out there and find out what that is.
Yeah. And then tune in again next week, Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern, on E360 TV, if that's where you tune in at Trajectory Channel. Dr. Lynn.
And I'm Justin. We'll see you then.